Hi guys, so this is a very short little video just to remind you of a few key pointers for paper 2 question 5. Things you will have learnt with your teacher, so I'm not going to try and teach you things here, I'm just trying to quickly remind you of some key things you will have learnt in the past. So paper 2 question 5 looks like this. It's the task where you get the statement followed by a task to do. It's more tricky, I think, than paper 1 question 5 in that there's so many variables, so much you have to think about and judgments you have to make in a split second in the exam. Whereas paper 1 question 5, you can pre-prepare elements and have ideas already in mind. So just really quickly to remind you, there's 5 types of text you could be asked to write, a leaflet as well, but I haven't included a leaflet on here for now. Most common ones I've seen on exam papers are article, speech and letter, but in theory you could be asked to write an essay. So just a quick reminder, and obviously you can go back to your notes from class as well, that if you're asked to do a piece of writing, that you are getting marks for how well your writing reflects the codes and conventions of the specific text type. So an article is a different type of text to a speech. It may have similar content and similar ideas within it, but the style of writing, the language, is different to a speech. So you will have learnt about these different types with your teachers, and you can go back and look at your work you've done. But I've just reminded you of some key elements here, okay? The other thing I just wanted to remind you of is the 4 different verbs. You could be asked to argue, persuade, explain or advise. So you're given a statement and asked to either respond to it in one of these ways. Fundamentally, you can treat these 3 verbs as being the same, more or less, for this task. What all of these verbs are asking you to do is to read a statement, to decide if you agree or disagree with it. Don't sit on the fence for this exam. You're likely to have a kind of slightly mixed view, but choose one side or the other. And then what you're being asked to do is to set out your viewpoint and use language in a way which is going to influence another human being to agree with you. Now, advice is a bit different and needs its own separate tutorial, but if people who want a tutorial and advice could get back to me, that would be great, rather than me making one if no one's looking at it. Okay, so 3 pillars of effective writing for this, I think, are the Aristotelian triad: logos, pathos and ethos. 3 ideas that if you want to be a successful writer, you want to successfully influence another human being to agree with you, you want to create these 3 ideas. Ethos is all about credibility. No one's going to be persuaded by someone if they don't believe in them, if they don't believe that they are trustworthy or a good person. So you are not only trying to sell your idea or your opinion, you're trying to sell yourself through your writing in a sense. Logos is all about logic and reason, so it's about factual statements, or for an exam, an appearance of a factual statement. Presenting the idea that you know stuff. Now, pathos, perhaps the most powerful one, is all about the emotional impact, trying to pull on the audience's heartstrings. People tend to be more easy to influence if you tap into their emotions than their intellect, because we can be quite stuck in our ways and quite thoughtful, but we can be also quite emotionally led. So ethos, logos and pathos, again, you will have learned about these before, but just the kind of key principles of how to build it. So if we go back to the exam task then, the key thing to think about with the exam task is the statement is likely to have a lot of information within it. You don't have to respond to it all. So this task says, funding for young people is too low and we don't have enough youth centres. It's no wonder some teenagers turn to crime and antisocial behaviour. So that's quite a big statement. That's quite a big social issue there. We've obviously got the first half of the statement, the cause bit of it, if you like, that funding for young people is too low, we should have more youth centres. And then we've got the effect, the consequence side of it, that as a result of a lack of funding, some teenagers turn to antisocial behaviour. They haven't got anywhere to go, they hang out in groups, that kind of thing. So processing the statement is important, but also not thinking you have to respond to every element of it. You could simply write an article or a piece of persuasive writing that there should be more youth centres, that there should be more money going into youth centres for young people, and not mention crime and antisocial behaviour at all, and still potentially score the high marks. So don't feel like you have to say every bit of every statement. The statement is a platform to get you to argue something. And then we obviously have the task, write an article for a local newspaper in which you argue your view in response to this statement. So the key to this is choose one side or the other to decide if you agree that there should be more money for youth centres, or if you think actually money should go into other things like the NHS or schooling or whatever it might be. So make a decision and stick to it. And I always suggest to my class the first step of the task is just to write a simple statement that sets out your viewpoint. So I would, if I was in the exam and I had this task, I would write underneath it, I agree that there should be more money spent on providing activities for young people. And that is what I am going to stick to. I'm not going to deviate from that at all. I am going to focus my whole piece of writing on agreeing that there should be more money spent on providing activities for young people. So I think always read the statement, read the task, write one very simple statement that takes less than 30 seconds so you are really clear, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to argue. Okay? Now, obviously, then I can highlight some key words. So this is an article. Articles, I think, are in many ways the most difficult text type because they're quite journalistic writing is quite sophisticated. It blends quite a lot of different styles and registers. So I need to think about making sure I try and replicate that. As a minimum, that I start with a headline, that I write in a way which is appropriate for an article. And obviously, the verb we've got here is argue. And as I said to you just now, basically what that means is set out what you think, set out that there should be more money spent on activities for young people, but in a way which is going to influence another human being to potentially agree with you. Okay, the other thing you will have learnt with your teachers is all about rhetorical language. And rhetorical devices shouldn't be used as a tick list. You're not necessarily going to get more marks for using these rhetorical devices, but they're one of the ways that a writer can bring persuasion to life. So potentially, as a little starting activity, just to remind yourself, on this sheet are 5 really nice rhetorical devices, ones I think work really nice in a range of types of writing. So for this task, there should be more money spent on providing activities for young people. Maybe just have a little practice at writing sentences, sentence level writing. Don't try and do the whole task. Just have a go at writing a sentence that uses hyperphora, one that uses anadiplosis, and so on, just to recap and revise these lovely devices. And if you're not sure how to do that, this screen has an example of some sentences I've already written. Now, these sentences are in response to a task, cars should be banned from city centres. So it's a different task to yours, it's quite different. But it doesn't matter because what you can see here is how I've used the devices. So I've said here, is there a way to improve the air quality for huge numbers of people? The answer is yes. By simply banning cars from city centres, the amount of CO2 would decrease significantly. So of course you could write, is there a way to improve the quality of childhood for huge numbers of teenagers? The answer is yes. By simply investing more money in youth centres, young people would have a lot more to do. So that's just kind of a quick example of how you can use my examples, adapt them for this task, just to recap and revisit sentence level writing and using rhetorical devices. Okay, the other thing I would say it's really important with paper 2 question 5 is planning. Because this question puts a lot of cognitive demands on you, you have to think about the type of writing you're producing and how to use the conventions to make it appropriate. And you have to think about the content. So this is probably the worst acronym ever invented, but I always tell my classes to go with this idea of BOLD. So when you plan, write the letters BALD down the side of your margin, and they stand for quite simple terms. So first of all, big ideas. So if you're going to persuade somebody that they should be more money invested in youth centres, why? What are your initial big ideas? What would be the benefits of that? Things like, and obviously in the task they've already given us an idea, haven't they? They've already given us the idea that it would decrease antisocial behaviour because young people would have something to do. The second one stands for anecdote. It's really effective in persuasive writing of all forms to tell a short story from your own experience, and in this case, in an exam context, that can be made up, which illustrates what you're saying. So a short story about, the decrease in youth centres or whatever it may be. The next one, logos, statements, facts, pieces of information you could use to support what you're saying. And lastly, this one, which I've called disprove, is really the counter argument. Absolutely key structure of this type of writing is showing that you understand the opposite view, but you can prove that it's wrong in a polite and friendly way. So being able to say, I totally understand that it's important that money is spent on the NHS. However, blah, 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 is a really important thing, okay? So planning out just trying to think in what might somebody who disagrees say. Someone who doesn't want more money spent on youth centres, what would their reason be? Try and put yourself in their shoes. And once you've thought of what their reason would be, what could you say to prove them wrong in a polite and appropriate manner? So again, as I say, all I suggest is that you write those 4 letters down the side of a margin, and you just put in reasons, ideas to help you, so that when you start writing, you've got something to come back to, so that your brain can focus on all the clever things of adapting language for form and using rhetorical devices. Perhaps the most difficult bit is getting started. Writing that very first introductory paragraph in all forms can be the most difficult. And that's when our good old general specific thesis format, I think, is brilliant. I always use this structure for my first paragraph of any writing for this task type. I start with a general sentence which just engages with the statement, a generalisation about the fact that there are in recent years, many youth centres have closed, and children and young people have had less and less opportunities to engage in community projects. Something that's quite general. It doesn't say my viewpoint, it's just engaging with the task. I then say something a bit more specific, and I generally start that sentence with the words in particular, because in particular immediately forces me to say something specific, something particular. And then my thesis sentence is always the big line of argument I intend to prove. So setting out that, it's clear that if we don't create better conditions for young people to thrive by providing them the youth centres they need, they're not going to be able to be successful adults. So you're kind of going from engaging with the statement in a broad sense, going into a bit more detail, and then setting out a big line of argument you intend to prove. And I find this GST structure works beautifully to get in a nice 3-sentence introduction. The most important thing you must not do is start with, I agree with the task because. This sentence we've written here is for planning purposes only. It cannot appear in your article at all. We never use this phrasing, I agree that. We would always start with the GST structure. Okay, so the best way for you to do this paper too is just to practice. And on Show My Homework, I've put, I think, about 10 tasks for you to have a go at. So you can just use your notes from class. Hopefully the things I've been through here have recapped and reminded you of a few key ideas. This sheet is also some sentence stems. I don't suggest you use these in order as such, but they're just ways of building it so that you can take some of the points I've said and practice doing some tasks. Now, of course, if you want to use them as sentence stems at first, you can, but I don't think that's the most effective way to do it. I think the most effective way to do it is to go to the slides on Show My Homework, pick a task, do the sentence level practice using the fun rhetorical figures, do some planning using the bold technique, write a GST intro, and then pick and choose which of these stems you think are useful to you to doing some tasks. And please send work to your teachers. Send them things you do so that they can give you specific and personal advice and feedback, which is much better than me trying to give you some generic advice on here. Okay, so please do feel free to message me. I can produce more tutorials on anything that's in particular you're unsure about. But for now, hopefully this gives you enough to be getting on with.